They laughed, they doubted, they even called security on him. But when billionaire Julian Crosswell revealed who he really was, the room froze. And the lesson he gave that day still echoes far beyond those walls. Julian Crosswell didn't need a red carpet. He didn't need security to clear the way or cameras flashing around him. What he wanted on that Tuesday morning in San Jose was something much simpler. To walk into the company he had built from nothing and feel its energy again. No press releases, no official meetings, just a quiet reminder to himself of why he had started it all. But the moment he stepped through the glass doors of Crosswell Energy Logistics, he knew this visit wasn't going to be simple. Julian was dressed casually, navy pullover, dark jeans, and a pair of running shoes. He carried no briefcase, no entourage, nothing to signal power. To anyone else in the lobby, he looked like an ordinary man walking in off the street. Ordinary, except for the calm authority in his walk. The receptionist, a young woman in her 20s with earbuds still dangling from her neck, looked up with polite confusion. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone clipped, professional. "Yes," Julian said warmly. "I'd like to go up to the executive floor." The receptionist typed something quickly, then frowned. "Do you have an appointment?" Julian smiled. "No appointment. I just wanted to see how things are running today." Her eyes flicked over him again. The sneakers, the pullover, no badge, no suit. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't allow walk-ins upstairs. Executives usually check in through security or send notice ahead of time." Julian tilted his head slightly, still calm. "I'm Julian Crosswell." The receptionist blinked, waiting for a punchline. Then she chuckled softly, the way someone might when a stranger makes a joke that doesn't quite land. "Right. And I'm Oprah," she said. A few people in the lobby chuckled. Julian's lips pressed together. He had experienced this kind of disbelief before, but never in the very building his name crowned in steel above the main entrance. "I assure you," he said evenly, "I'm exactly who I say I am. My office is on the top floor. You can call up and confirm." The receptionist leaned back, folding her arms. "Sir, we can't just call upstairs every time someone claims to be the CEO. Julian's gaze flicked briefly toward the security desk across the lobby, where a guard was already watching him closely. He breathed out slowly, reminding himself not to let irritation take the wheel. Another employee, a man in a fitted gray suit waiting near the elevators, glanced over with curiosity. "What's the problem?" he asked the receptionist. "This gentleman says he's our CEO," she replied with a half smile. The man looked Julian up and down. "Seriously?" Julian extended a hand, steady. "Yes." "Julian Crosswell, you work here?" The man hesitated but shook his hand quickly, as if not wanting to make a scene. His handshake was weak, skeptical. "I'm in product development. I've never seen you before." Julian's patience thinned. "That may be true. We have more than 5,000 employees now. I don't know everyone either." The receptionist's smile faded. She leaned closer, voice firm. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside while we verify." Julian felt the tension in the room shift. Conversations in the lobby slowed. Several people glanced toward him, whispering under their breath. He could hear fragments. Is he serious? That's him? No way. He had imagined this visit would be a chance to reconnect quietly with the people who kept his vision alive. Instead, he was being treated like a stranger trespassing in his own house. Julian straightened, not with arrogance, but with the kind of dignity that comes from years of being underestimated. "I don't need a pass to walk into my own company," he said, his voice carrying enough weight to quiet the whispers around him. The receptionist's cheeks flushed. She glanced nervously at the security guard who was already approaching. "Sir," the guard said, stopping a few feet away, "is there an issue here?" The receptionist jumped in quickly. "He says he's the CEO, wants to go upstairs." The guard's eyes narrowed slightly. He was tall, solidly built, his voice measured but skeptical. "And your name again?" "Julian Crosswell," Julian replied without raising his voice. "The name on the building outside." The guard's brows pinched together. He pulled out his walkie-talkie, clearly preparing to call someone. Julian folded his arms, waiting. He had walked into boardrooms with presidents and heads of state, negotiated billion-dollar contracts across continents, and testified before congressional committees. Yet here he was, being treated like a man trying to sneak into an office tower. But the situation was about to escalate further when someone else decided to get involved. The guard's hand lingered near his radio, as though deciding whether this situation warranted backup. His posture was steady but firm, the kind of stance that sent a clear message. You don't belong here until I say you do. Julian stayed calm. He had learned long ago that raising his voice or showing frustration only hardened walls. Instead, he let his tone remain even. You don't need to call for backup, Julian said. You can call upstairs and ask for Leah Drummond. She'll confirm who I am. The guard didn't move. His eyes flicked toward the receptionist, who gave a subtle shrug, as if to say, I don't buy it either. A small group of employees waiting near the elevator began whispering again. One woman in a pencil skirt leaned toward her colleague. That guy thinks he's Julian Crosswell? She muttered, just loud enough for Julian to catch. He didn't respond. He'd been here before, not in this building, but in airports, restaurants, golf clubs, places where people looked at him and assumed he couldn't possibly be who he said he was. Only this time, it was happening in the heart of the empire he had built. The guard finally spoke. Sir, without ID or clearance, I can't let you proceed. If you'd like, I can walk you out, and you can schedule a visit like everyone else. Julian's jaw tightened, but his words were still measured. Do you really believe I'd show up here pretending to be someone I'm not? The guard didn't flinch. It happens more than you'd think. The receptionist chimed in, her voice clipped. Look, we don't mean any offense, but this building has protocols. We can't just let anyone wander upstairs saying they own the place. Julian studied her face, noting the confidence in her dismissal. She wasn't being cruel, but she wasn't listening either. Miss, Julian said gently, I don't need to wander. I need to walk upstairs to my office. That's it. The receptionist shook her head and turned back to her monitor, as if the conversation had ended. And that's when Miles Redden entered the scene. He was in his early 30s, sharp suit, hair slicked back, the kind of employee who walked like every hallway was a runway. Freshly promoted to floor manager, he carried himself with the swagger of someone eager to prove they belonged. What's going on here? Miles asked, his voice cutting through the tension. The receptionist exhaled, relieved. This gentleman says he's Julian Crosswell. He wants to go upstairs. Miles's eyes flicked toward Julian, sizing him up in seconds. His smirk was small but sharp. Really? Yes, Julian replied, meeting his gaze squarely. Miles chuckled under his breath, glancing at the security guard as if the two shared an inside joke. Look, I don't know what game you're trying to play, but CEOS, don't just stroll in off the street without notice. That's not how it works. Several employees nearby murmured in agreement. Julian let the words hang for a moment before responding. You think I need an invitation to walk into a company I created? Miles crossed his arms. If you're really Julian Crosswell, you'd know we have strict procedures. Executives announce their visits. They don't show up in sneakers. The lobby filled with low laughter from a few employees. Someone even pulled out their phone, pretending to scroll but clearly recording the exchange. Julian's voice stayed calm but firmer now. You seem very sure of yourself, Mr. Redden, Miles said proudly. Floor manager. Julian gave a small nod. Mr. Redden, I don't need to prove myself to you. But if you'd like proof, call upstairs. Ask for Leah Drummond or Michael Avery. They've worked with me for years. Miles tilted his head, unimpressed. Or maybe you should prove it right now, because until then, you're just a man wasting our time. The security guard's hand pressed against his radio again. Mr. Redden, should I escort him out? Julian exhaled slowly, realizing how absurd this had become. In his own headquarters, surrounded by people whose paychecks were signed by his name, he was being treated like an intruder. Escort me out? Julian repeated, his voice low but carrying enough weight to quiet the chuckles. Do you know how many nights I slept on office couches to make this company survive? Do you know how many times I put my own money on the line when banks turned us away? You stand here mocking my shoes, but the only reason you have this lobby, these jobs, this building, is because of me. The words cut the laughter short. Even the receptionist's fingers froze over her keyboard. Miles didn't back down. Nice speech. But words don't make you the CEO. Evidence does. Until then, this conversation is over. The guard took a step closer. Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me. Julian stared at him, silent for a beat. He wasn't afraid. He was disappointed. This wasn't about sneakers or protocol or ID badges. It was about something deeper, something that sat like a stone in the pit of his stomach. But before the situation could spin completely out of control, the crowd in the lobby began to grow, and whispers turned into a full standoff. By now, the lobby had gone from a casual morning shuffle to a stage set for confrontation. People were no longer pretending not to watch. Some leaned against walls, others lingered by the elevators, their conversations hushed but deliberate. A janitor with a mop paused mid-swipe, his bucket standing in silence, the water inside barely rippling. Julian stood in the center of it all, the target of eyes that weighed him down with curiosity, disbelief, and judgment. Miles Redden, enjoying the attention, squared his shoulders and leaned slightly toward Julian. He had the air of a man who believed the scene was his to command. "Sir," Miles said, his voice edged with condescension, "you've made your point. You think you're the founder of this company. That's fine. But we can't hold up the entire lobby because you feel entitled to wander upstairs. You need to leave." Julian didn't move. "I'm not leaving." The words weren't loud, but they carried through the room. Something in his tone made the whispers die down for a moment. Even the security guard hesitated, as though uncertain about pressing the issue further. Miles gave a short, mocking laugh. "Not leaving? What exactly do you think happens next then? You stay here until someone claps for you?" "This isn't a movie." Julian's eyes locked on him. "No, this isn't a movie. It's real life. And in real life, sometimes the people who built the foundation get treated like strangers in the house they designed." The janitor in the corner shifted his weight, his expression betraying quiet recognition. A few younger employees near the front desk avoided eye contact, their smirks fading as Julian's words settled in. But Miles wasn't interested in reflection. He was interested in dominance. "Security," Miles said, his voice sharper now. "Do your job. Escort this man out before this gets any worse." The guard's hand twitched, but he didn't move forward. He looked conflicted, caught between his orders and the possibility, however slim, that this man really was who he claimed to be. Julian noticed. He turned toward the guard, his tone calm but piercing. "Do you know the name on your paycheck?" The guard hesitated. "Crosswell." Julian nodded. "And do you know where that name comes from?" The guard didn't answer. The silence was its own answer. Julian took one step closer to Miles, not aggressive, but steady. "Mr. Redden, what exactly do you think Julian Crosswell looks like? A man in a tailored suit with a crowd trailing behind him? A face you've only seen in a press release?" Miles smirked. "Exactly. Not a man in sneakers standing here making speeches." Julian shook his head. "Then maybe that's the problem. You don't recognize the reality of leadership when it doesn't fit your picture. You don't see the work behind the image." The receptionist, who had been silent since Miles stepped in, glanced nervously between them. She typed something quickly into her computer, as if searching for confirmation, but she said nothing. Julian let the silence sit heavy for a moment. Then he spoke again, his voice lowering. "I started this company in a garage off Story Road in East San Jose. Do you know what it felt like to beg banks for a loan and get turned away over and over again? Do you know how many nights I walked home in the rain because I couldn't afford gas?" Miles rolled his eyes, but Julian pressed on. "I lived it. Every employee here lives in the comfort of what was built from those sacrifices. And yet, the second I walk in without a suit, without an escort, I'm treated like I don't belong." The room had grown so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning felt loud. People were no longer smirking. They were listening. But Miles, unwilling to lose ground, jabbed back. "You can tell whatever story you want. But unless someone upstairs comes down right now, you're just another man making claims he can't back up." Julian studied him for a moment. His patience was remarkable, but the tension in his jaw betrayed how much this stung. He turned slightly, addressing the employees gathered nearby. "Do you all agree with him? That I don't belong here?" Nobody answered. A few glanced at their shoes. One young intern looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Miles spread his arms, gesturing to the silence. "See? Nobody believes you." Julian exhaled slowly. For a brief moment, weariness crossed his face. He wasn't angry at the disbelief. He was saddened by it. "Sometimes," Julian said quietly, "people will look right at you and still not see you." The words struck something deeper than the argument itself. The janitor set his mop back in the bucket. The receptionist shifted uneasily in her chair. The guard lowered his radio. Miles, however, doubled down. Enough of the speeches. Security, this man needs to leave. Now. The guard took a slow step forward, but his hesitation was obvious. The tension was thick enough to stop anyone else from moving. But before the guard could lay a hand on Julian, a new voice cut through the lobby. One that would change the entire room in an instant. The new voice carried across the marble lobby, sharp and deliberate. "What's happening here?" Every head turned toward the elevator bank. An older employee in a navy blazer holding a leather portfolio stepped out. His name tag read, Operations Division. He paused, scanning the tension in the room. The security guard frozen mid-step. The receptionist flushed with embarrassment, and Miles standing tall like a self-appointed gatekeeper. Julian didn't say anything. He simply looked back at Miles, his silence louder than words. The man from operations frowned. "Is there a problem?" Miles jumped in before anyone else could answer. "We've got an individual here claiming he's Julian Crosswell. He refuses to leave. We're handling it." The man blinked. His expression flickered. Confusion first, then realization that this wasn't some prank. His gaze rested on Julian for longer than a beat, as though something about the man's composure rang familiar. But before he could say more, Miles took control again. "We need to keep this professional," Miles said firmly, loud enough for the entire lobby. "This isn't a circus." "Sir," he turned to Julian, "one last chance to step outside before this escalates further." Julian's shoulders lifted slightly as he breathed in, then out. His calm demeanor hadn't cracked, but his eyes carried weight now, the kind of heaviness that comes when patience is tested to its edge. "I built this company," he said again, his voice low, steady, but carrying enough force to reach every corner of the lobby. "And you want me to stand outside in the parking lot like I don't belong here?" Someone in the back whispered, "Wait, that really is him." The words traveled fast, sparking murmurs. Miles snapped his head toward the crowd. "Unless you know for certain, don't spread rumors." "We don't take the word of strangers." Julian turned toward the security guard, locking eyes with him. "You've seen my picture before. Think carefully. Does my face really look unfamiliar to you?" The guard hesitated, caught between loyalty to his post and the unmistakable recognition creeping into his expression. Julian pressed on, softer now, but sharper in meaning. "How quickly do you assume someone doesn't belong because they don't look the way you expect them to? Do I need to wear a $1,000 suit for you to recognize worth? Or would a man in sneakers never be enough?" The receptionist's fingers froze over her keyboard. Her eyes flicked down, guilt shadowing her face. Miles scoffed. "This is ridiculous." "Security." But the guard didn't move. Neither did anyone else. The crowd in the lobby was no longer entertained. They were caught, suspended between doubt and dawning recognition. Julian turned his attention back to Miles, closing the distance between them by a step. "You want proof? Call upstairs. Call Leah Drummond right now. She'll tell you who I am." Miles shook his head with disdain. "You don't get to dictate how this works." Julian's voice cut back, firm but measured. "I already did. 20 years ago, when I founded this company, that's the only reason you even stand here with a title today." The crowd gasped quietly at the bite in his words. Miles bristled, jaw set. His pride stung in front of dozens of employees. "I won't argue with you. You're done here, guard." And then it happened. The elevator bell chimed. The polished doors slid open. And stepping out, heels clicking across the marble, was Leah Drummond. She was in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed, her reputation inside the company one of discipline and loyalty. Leah had been with Julian since the early years, when there was no headquarters, only a rented warehouse and a dream. She carried herself with authority, but the moment her eyes landed on Julian, her face changed completely. "Oh my God," she gasped, quickening her steps. "Julian?" The entire room shifted. Dozens of eyes swung back toward him. The silence was immediate, heavier than before. Julian allowed the faintest smile. "Good morning, Leah." Leah dropped her portfolio on the receptionist's desk without a second thought and reached for his hand. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea you were coming in today." She glanced at the guard, then at Miles, her expression sharp with outrage. "What exactly is going on here?" The receptionist stammered, her voice small. He didn't have ID." Leah's tone cut like glass. He doesn't need ID. His name is on the building. The guard's face drained of color. Miles, for once, had nothing to say. His mouth opened, but no words came. Leah turned back to Julian, her voice softer now. Are you all right? Did they seriously try to stop you? Julian nodded, his calm never wavering. They tried more than that. They told me I didn't belong here. The weight of those words pressed against the entire lobby. Heads lowered, guilt spread across faces like ink in water. Leah straightened, fury simmering beneath her composed exterior. She turned back toward the crowd. This man built everything you see around you. Every desk, every floor, every paycheck comes from his vision. And you treated him like an intruder. Nobody dared respond. Julian exhaled, finally allowing the tension in his shoulders to release just slightly. But inside, the damage had already been done. But as the silence settled, Julian knew the real test wasn't over. Because what mattered now was what he would say next. The atmosphere in the lobby was thick, almost suffocating. You could hear the shuffle of shoes as employees shifted uncomfortably, the squeak of the janitor's mop bucket wheel as it was nudged back into place, the click of Leah's heels as she squared herself between Julian and the people who had just humiliated him. She looked directly at Miles, her voice low but sharp. Tell me you didn't just order security to remove him. Miles swallowed hard, the smirk gone from his face. His voice faltered. I didn't know it was him. How could I? That's the point, Leah snapped. You didn't even try. You just assumed. The receptionist's face burned red. She looked as though she wanted to sink beneath her desk. The security guard dropped his gaze to the marble floor, his radio still in hand, but useless now. Julian hadn't moved. He didn't need to. His silence said more than anger ever could. His eyes swept across the room. The receptionist, the guard, the interns by the wall. Miles, with his pride cracked open for everyone to see. Each of them looked away under his gaze. Leah's tone softened when she turned back to Julian. You shouldn't have had to go through this. Julian finally spoke. His voice was calm, but it cut through the air like a blade. It's not the first time, Leah, and we both know it won't be the last. That sentence hung heavy. Some employees shifted their weight, others bowed their heads. Everyone understood the deeper meaning. Julian stepped forward, not with aggression, but with the gravity of a man who had carried weight heavier than this moment. He turned to the crowd. Do you know what I see right now? His voice carried to every corner of the lobby. I see people who work under my name in a building built from my sacrifices, who couldn't imagine that the man who started it all would look like me. You looked at me and saw someone who doesn't belong. That's what hurts. No one dared interrupt. Julian let the silence linger, then added, and the irony? Every one of you is here because I refused to let people tell me I didn't belong. The words dug deep. The janitor leaned back against his mop, nodding ever so slightly, his eyes fixed on Julian with quiet respect. Leah folded her arms, glaring at Miles. Apologize. Right now, Miles cleared his throat, his voice small, stripped of the confidence he had walked in with. Mr. Crosswell, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have doubted you. Julian studied him for a long moment. You didn't just doubt me, Mr. Redden. You dismissed me. There's a difference. The crowd shifted again, a ripple of discomfort moving through the lobby. Miles had no response. Julian turned to the receptionist. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her cheeks were blotched red with shame. Finally, she stammered, I'm so sorry, Mr. Crosswell. I just thought... Julian raised a hand gently, stopping her. You thought you were doing your job. But part of doing your job is knowing the story of the place you work for, not just the protocols, the story. She nodded quickly, tears brimming in her eyes. Leah stepped closer to Julian, her voice quieter now. Do you want me to clear the lobby? Julian shook his head. No, let them hear this. He turned back to the room, standing tall in his sneakers and pullover, more commanding in that moment than any suit could make him. I didn't come here today to give a speech. I came because I wanted to walk through these doors the same way I did 20 years ago, when this company was barely surviving. I wanted to feel that again. But what I walked into was a reminder of something bigger, Respect isn't guaranteed. Not even with a name on the building. Respect is earned every single day. And it's given when people are willing to see beyond their assumptions. A murmur of agreement stirred in the back, faint but present. Julian let the words sink in, then added, "If you can't look at someone without first putting them into a box, you'll miss the very people who make this place what it is. Don't make that mistake again." The security guard finally lifted his head. His voice was low but sincere. "Understood, sir." Julian nodded once, then glanced at Leah. "Shall we go upstairs?" Leah gestured toward the elevators. "Of course." As Julian moved toward the elevator with Leah by his side, the crowd parted in silence. Eyes followed him, but this time with something different. Respect mixed with shame, the weight of realizing they had misjudged the very man who had made their careers possible. The doors opened. Julian stepped inside. He didn't look back, but his words still echoed in the room. But the silence left behind in the lobby was only the beginning. Because upstairs, the lesson was about to grow even larger. The elevator doors slid shut, and for the first time that morning, the lobby exhaled. People exchanged glances, awkward, unsettled, each one silently calculating their part in what had just happened. The receptionist slumped in her chair, staring at her monitor but seeing nothing. The security guard adjusted his badge nervously, as though the weight of it had suddenly doubled. Miles stood stiffly, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor, as though it might swallow him whole. Leah rode up with Julian in silence at first. She studied his face, the quiet composure masking what she knew had to sting beneath the surface. Finally, she spoke softly. "You didn't deserve that." Julian's eyes stayed fixed on the ascending floor numbers above the doors. "It's not about deserving. It's about reality. Some people will always measure you by what they expect to see, not what you've done." Leah's voice carried guilt now. "But in your own building? These people should know better." Julian shook his head. "That's the point, Leah. If it can happen here, in the place where my name is etched into glass, then imagine everywhere else." The elevator chimed, doors opening to the executive floor. The space was sleek, lined with glass offices and conference rooms overlooking San Jose's skyline. Employees looked up from their desks, surprised to see Julian stride in unannounced. A few smiled nervously, others whispered greetings. Word of the incident in the lobby had already spread like wildfire. Julian didn't waste time. He motioned toward the large conference room. "Gather the team." Within minutes, senior staff and department heads filed in, filling the long oak table. Leah stood by the door, arms folded, while Julian remained at the head, hands pressed lightly against the table's edge. He didn't sit. "I came here today for one reason," Julian began, his voice steady, carrying the weight of authority but tinged with something deeper. "I wanted to remind myself of where this company started. I wanted to feel the same spark I felt when we were working out of a garage with 3 laptops and a whiteboard. I didn't come here expecting applause. I didn't come here expecting red carpet. I came here to reconnect." He paused, letting his gaze travel across the room. No one dared interrupt. "But what I walked into downstairs..." His jaw tightened briefly. "It wasn't just about me. It was about what we've allowed to fester inside our culture. People saw me and didn't recognize me, so they dismissed me. They assumed I couldn't belong. That is more dangerous than any quarterly loss, any competitor, any economic downturn, because that's how companies rot, not from the outside, but from the inside." A murmur of discomfort swept the table. Leah stepped forward, adding weight to his words. He was told he didn't belong. In the very building that bears his name, by our own staff. The room fell silent. Julian raised his hand slightly, quieting even the shifting of papers. "Don't get me wrong. This isn't about me feeling insulted. I've been doubted my entire life. I can handle that. What this is about is the fact that doubt, bias, and dismissal are happening right here under our roof. And if it happened to me, you'd better believe it's happening to others. Employees, visitors, maybe even clients." The vice president of operations cleared his throat, his face pale. "Mr. Crosswell, I don't know what to say. This is a wake-up call." Julian leaned forward slightly. "Then wake up. Because here's the truth. We can't build a company that runs on innovation if we still run on assumptions about who belongs and who doesn't. You can't preach inclusion in your hiring campaigns and then treat someone like an outsider the moment they don't fit your picture. A young director spoke hesitantly. What do you want us to do? Julian looked at her directly. I want you to look in the mirror. Every single person in this company needs to ask themselves what assumptions they carry and how those assumptions influence the way they treat others. If you can't do that, then I don't care how skilled you are. You don't belong here. The words hit hard. Chairs shifted uncomfortably. Eyes darted to the table, pens, anything but his steady gaze. Leah finally broke the tension, her voice sharp but measured. He's right. Culture isn't posters on the wall. It's how we treat people when no one's watching. Julian's voice softened then, but it was no less powerful. I've fought too hard to see this company lose itself to arrogance. Remember where you came from. Remember the sacrifices. And remember that no matter how high we climb, the true test of our character is how we treat the person standing right in front of us. The room remained quiet, not with indifference, but with reflection. You could feel the weight of his words settling in, heavy but necessary. Julian finally pulled out a chair and sat, folding his hands. So let's not waste this moment. Let's make sure what happened downstairs never happens again. But while the executives wrestled with the lesson, the story of that morning was already spreading far beyond those walls, and its impact would reach further than Julian expected. By the end of the meeting, no one had touched their coffee. The air in the conference room was heavy, not because Julian had shouted, he hadn't raised his voice once, but because he had forced everyone to sit with their reflection. For executives who were used to numbers, graphs, and clean solutions, this was a problem without a neat chart to fix it. Julian rose from his seat slowly, straightening his pullover. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. I came here to remind us of who we are. But sometimes the reminder comes in ways you don't plan. What happened downstairs wasn't just a mistake. It was a mirror. Now it's up to each of us, whether we want to look away or face what it shows. He gathered his things, though really, he had nothing but his phone in his pocket, and walked toward the door. Leah followed, her heels echoing softly against the polished floor. Nobody stopped him. Nobody dared. As they stepped back into the hallway, Leah spoke gently. You know the story's already traveling through every floor, right? Julian allowed the faintest smile. Good. Let it. Some lessons are more powerful when they don't come from an email memo. By the time they reached the elevators, employees were already glancing at them differently. People who had looked down at their desks when he first arrived now met his gaze directly, some nodding in acknowledgement, others simply lowering their eyes in quiet respect. The ride down was silent, but Julian's mind wasn't. He thought of the early years. The garage on Story Road, the secondhand desks, the nights when he had to choose between paying rent or paying engineers. Back then, he wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't even sure he'd make it through another quarter. What kept him going was belief. Not just in the company, but in himself, when no one else believed he belonged. Now, decades later, he had everything he once dreamed of. Wealth, recognition, a company that had reshaped an industry. And still, in his own lobby, he was told he didn't belong. The irony wasn't lost on him. The elevator doors opened to the lobby once more. The same crowd lingered, quieter now, humbled. Conversations stopped as he stepped out. Eyes followed his every move. Julian paused in the center of the room, glancing back toward the receptionist's desk, the security guard, and even Miles, who lingered near the corner, his pride bruised, but his attention fixed on Julian. For a moment, Julian considered walking out without another word. But then he thought of the younger employees who might carry this memory with them, not as gossip, but as a lesson. So he turned and spoke one last time. What happened here today isn't just about me. It's about what happens in boardrooms, in job interviews, in classrooms, in every place where someone decides another person doesn't belong before they even listen. If you take anything from this morning, let it be this. Never let your assumptions blind you to the truth standing right in front of you. The words settled over the room. The receptionist's eyes brimmed again. The guard gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and Miles lowered his gaze, his earlier confidence stripped away. Julian exhaled, then added quietly, respect isn't about titles. It isn't about clothes. It's about humanity. If you can't give that to every person who walks through these doors, then this company has lost its soul. He turned then, pushing open the glass doors and stepping out into the California sun. The lobby stayed silent behind him, the lesson carved into the air like stone. On the sidewalk outside, a group of employees who had just arrived spotted him immediately. One young man hesitated, then called out nervously, "Mr. Crosswell." Julian stopped, turning back with a calm expression. "Yes? I just wanted to say thank you for building this place, for everything." Julian studied the young man, recognizing in his eyes the same hunger he had once carried. "It's not about me," he said gently. "It's about what you do when it's your turn." The young man nodded, and Julian continued toward the street, blending into the world the way he had when he first started. Unrecognized, underestimated, but never diminished. That morning, the company learned a hard truth. Greatness doesn't always come wrapped in the package you expect. And sometimes, the most powerful reminder of respect comes when you fail to give it. And for everyone watching, there's a lesson too. Don't wait for wealth or titles to prove your worth. Don't let someone else's narrow picture define who you are, and never assume you know the story of the person standing in front of you. Because the truth? The person you dismissed today might be the one who built the very ground you're standing on. So if you took something from this story, remember it, carry it with you, and subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain. They remind us what really matters.